The sky over the Nevada test and training range was a canvas of impossible blue. A vast, empty dome where America's most advanced warplanes practiced the deadly art of aerial combat. It was a place defined by noise, the thunderous roar of afterburners, the sonic boom that rattled windows 50 miles away, and the constant, coded chatter of pilots pushing their machines to the edge of oblivion. But on this day the silence was a liar. It began not with a bang, but with a whisper, a ghost on the screens in the darkened command center at Nellis Air Force Base. Master Sergeant Elias Thorne, a man whose face was a roadmap of 1,000 simulated battles, was the first to see it, a single intermittent blip on the far edge of the long-range passive sensors. It wasn't on the primary SPY-6 radar, nor was it squawking any identification codes. It was just a flicker, a digital phantom in the empty desert air. Colonel Marcus Vance, Carlson Warden, leaned over Thorne's console, his jaw tight, probably a flock of geese reflecting off an atmospheric duct. Run a diagnostic. But it wasn't geese. 10 minutes later, another blip appeared, then another, and another, until 8 of them were arrayed in a perfect, predatory arrowhead formation. They moved with a fluid synchronicity that was unnervingly precise, their intermittent signal making them impossible to lock onto. They were deep inside restricted airspace, heading for the base, and they were utterly, terrifyingly silent. An emergency briefing was called. The room was thick with the smell of burnt coffee and controlled anxiety. The top pilots of the 64th Aggressor Squadron, men who flew F-35s painted in enemy camouflage, were all present. Lieutenant Cale Jensen, Calcine Viper, cocky and brilliant, scoffed at the screen. Stealth drones, a new EW tactic from the Russians. Warden shook his head. Their heat signatures are nil. Their radar cross-section is a ghost. Whatever they are, they're not like anything in our threat library. In the back of the room, leaning against the wall, was Captain Anya Sharma. She wasn't an aggressor. She was a recent transfer, an F-22 pilot assigned to a data analysis and threat integration unit. A desk job. The other pilots barely knew her, and what they did know, they didn't respect. She was quiet, her uniform immaculate, her gaze distant. She carried the calcine Nix, a name that felt too mythic and dark for a woman who spent her days staring at spreadsheets. She said nothing, just watched the screen, her expression unreadable. Viper leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. So, what's the play, Warden? Send me and Lancer up. We'll get a visual, paint the targets, and this little ghost story is over before lunch. His confidence was a tangible force in the room, the easy swagger of a man who had never truly faced the unknown. Warden, however, was more cautious. His eyes were still fixed on the tactical display, where the 8 phantoms continued their silent, inexorable advance. They didn't fly like drones. Drones followed predictable, programmed paths. These things moved with an organic, predatory grace, adjusting their formation in minute ways, as if they were breathing in unison. Negative, Viper. We don't know their capabilities. Scrambling a standard 2-ship is too risky until we have better intel. The frustration in the room was palpable. These were fighter pilots, men whose very existence was predicated on action. Waiting felt like a betrayal of their nature. The discussion devolved into technical jargon, sensor sweeps, electronic countermeasures, satellite-based imaging, requests. Through it all, Nix remained a silent statue at the back of the room. Her stillness was a stark contrast to the restless energy of the aggressor pilots. She wasn't looking at the main screen anymore. Her eyes were focused on a smaller, secondary monitor displaying raw data from an older, almost forgotten passive listening system, the NALR-94. It was a relic, designed to detect the faintest electronic emissions, the kind of system most modern fighters, with their powerful active radars, deemed obsolete. But Nix had spent 5 years in a program that didn't officially exist, a program that hunted for things that lived in the electronic shadows. She saw what the others didn't. The phantoms weren't silent, they were whispering. They were communicating on a frequency so tight and low-powered that it was being dismissed as background noise. It was a language she recognized. A cold dread, familiar and sharp, settled in her stomach. She pushed herself off the wall, her movements deliberate. The room quieted as she approached the main console. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was low and steady, cutting through the nervous chatter. "Colonel, you can't send a 2-ship. They'll be torn apart before they even know they're in a fight. You need to send one," Viper snorted. "Against 8 unknowns, who's going to be that stupid?" Nix met his gaze, her dark eyes holding no trace of fear or bravado. "I will," she said. The silence that followed was heavier than any before it. The room erupted not in a shout, but in a wave of incredulous murmurs and stifled laughter. Viper actually chuckled. A sharp, dismissive sound. "You, Captain, with all due respect, you're a data analyst. Your last logged combat sortie was, well, it's not even in the system. This isn't a simulation." He gestured to the main screen, where the 8 ghostly icons crept closer. "That's the real world out there." Warden held up a hand, his expression a mixture of annoyance and curiosity. He looked at Nyx, truly looked at her for the first time. He saw the pilot's wings on her chest, of course, but he also saw a deep, unnerving calm in her eyes. It wasn't the feigned calm of a rookie trying to impress, it was the profound stillness of someone who had been to the edge and back. "Explain yourself, Captain," Warden commanded, his voice flat. Nyx pointed to the secondary monitor. "They're not running active radar, they're using a passive, multi-static system. Each craft is a receiver, but only one transmits, and it does so in microbursts on a shifting frequency. They're networked. They see everything, but you can't see them. Your F-35s, with their sensor fusion and data linking, will light you up like a Christmas tree on their displays the second you go active." She traced a line on the screen. "They're hunting. A standard 2-ship formation is predictable. They'll anticipate your tactics, vector one of you away, and kill the other. Then they'll kill the first. It's a classic Patan trap, executed with technology we haven't seen before." Master Sergeant Thorne stared at his console, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He isolated the frequencies Nyx had indicated. A cascade of encrypted data filled the screen. "My God," Thorne whispered. "She's right. It's there. It's just so faint." Viper's smirk had vanished, replaced by a look of grudging confusion. He still couldn't reconcile the woman in front of him, the quiet, overlooked analyst, with the tactical acumen she was displaying. Warden's gaze was intense. "And why one ship? Why you?" "Because their system is designed to track multiple high-output targets," Nyx explained, her voice never wavering. "A single F-22, flying a passive profile, can slip through the gaps in their network. My aircraft has the ALR-94. It's the only plane on this base that can hear them without talking. I can get close, I can see what they are." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle in the silent room. "You sent me here to integrate threat data, Colonel. This is a threat. Let me go integrate." The silence in the briefing room was absolute. Warden stared at Nyx, his mind racing. Everything she said was tactically sound, yet utterly unorthodox. The F-22 Raptor was an air superiority fighter, a predator. Using it as a stealth reconnaissance platform, flown by a pilot with a classified and unverifiable combat history, went against every protocol in the book. But the 8 blips on his screen were also against every protocol. They were an unknown variable that was rapidly becoming a clear and present danger to one of America's most sensitive military installations. He looked from Nyx's unwavering eyes to Viper's no sober face. The swagger was gone, replaced by the focused intensity of a pilot forced to confront a problem he couldn't solve with raw aggression. "Thorne," Warden barked. "What's her status?" Master Sergeant Thorne's fingers were a blur. "Captain Sharma is fully certified on the F-22, flight status current. She's logged over 2,000 hours in the airframe, Colonel. Notable. Them are black-flagged, redacted hours. That meant special operations. Programs that existed in the shadows." It explained the calcine Nyx. She wasn't just a data analyst. She was a ghost. Warden made a decision. The route was failing him. It was time to trust a pilot. "Get her a jet," he said, his voice resonating with finality. "Viper, you and Lancer are on hot standby. If she makes contact, you scramble on her mark, but you do not engage unless I give the word. Is that clear?" "Crystal, Colonel," Viper said, his eyes on Nyx as she turned to leave. There was no mockery in his tone now, only a deep, unsettling curiosity. The walk to the hangar was a study in contrasts. The desert sun was blinding, the air hot and still, but inside Nyx's mind, there was a cold, focused calm. She ignored the skeptical glances of the ground crew as she approached her aircraft. It was an F-22 like any other, a symphony of sharp angles and radar-absorbent skin, but to her, it was an extension of her own senses. As she ascended the ladder, she ran a gloved hand along the fuselage, a silent communion with the machine. Inside the cockpit, the world vanished. There was only the hum of the avionics, the familiar scent of ozone and hydraulic fluid, and the panoramic view of the canopy. She went through the pre-flight checks with an economy of motion that spoke of thousands of hours of practice. Each flip of a switch, each press of a button, was an ingrained reflex. Tower, this is Nix 1, requesting permission for an immediate, unrestricted climb. Vector Zaranina 0. The voice of the air traffic controller came back, laced with confusion. Nix 1, be advised, airspace is restricted. All flights are grounded. Warden's voice cut in over the command channel, sharp and clear. Tower, she has my authority. Clear her for takeoff. Godspeed. Nix's fingers tightened on the throttle. Nix is on the roll. With a deafening roar that tore through the desert silence, the Raptor hurtled down the runway and clawed its way into the sky. A lone gray predator ascending into the vast hostile blue. The ascent was brutal and swift. Nix pushed the F-22 to its limits, the twin Pratt and Whitney engines screaming as she climbed almost vertically, a silver needle stitching a thread into the fabric of the sky. Below her, the sprawling grid of Nellis Air Force Base shrank into a geometric pattern on the desert floor. She was alone, a single soul suspended between the earth and the heavens, and she had never felt more at home. At 60,000 feet, she leveled off. The sky here was a different color, a deep, bruised purple at the edge of space. The air was thin, the silence profound. It was a silence she understood, a silence that was not empty, but full of unseen things. She brought the Raptor to a near stall, a ghost in the stratosphere, and began to listen. Her primary displays were dark. She ran no active radar, sent out no electronic queries. Her entire focus was on the faint, almost imperceptible whispers being gathered by the ARO-94 system. On her secondary display, the world was not one of solid objects, but of faint energy signatures. It was like seeing the ghosts of light and sound. The command center watched her icon on their screens, a single, friendly blue triangle moving with impossible slowness against the 8 hostile red diamonds. Nix, what's your status? Warden's voice was a tense crackle in her ear. Angels, 60, passive and listening, she replied, her voice calm, her breathing even. I'm painting a picture, Warden. Stand by. The 8 contacts were still in their perfect arrowhead, moving with an eerie, coordinated purpose. They were not flying like fighters. They were flowing, like a school of sharks, sensing blood in the water. Nix adjusted her own position, a slow, deliberate dance on the edge of their awareness. She was a moth, drawn to a flame she could not yet see. Then she heard it. A focused burst of data, infinitesimally brief, shot from the lead craft to the one on its flank. It was a targeting solution, but it wasn't aimed at her. It was aimed at the ground, at Nellis. A cold realization washed over her. They weren't here to fight. They weren't here for reconnaissance. They were a decapitation strike force. They were going to wipe the base and its entire contingent of advanced aircraft and personnel off the map before anyone could even react. Warden, they're not drones, she said, her voice dropping, losing its detached calm for the first time. They're weapons-free. Their target is the base. I say again, their target is the base. A new sound filled her cockpit, a high-pitched, insistent tone, a missile lock, but it wasn't on her. The Phantoms had targeted the base's main command and control center. They're launching, I repeat, they've fired on the base. Nix's voice, sharp and urgent, sliced through the stunned silence of the command center. On the main screen, multiple new icons bloomed from the enemy formation, streaking towards the blue dot that represented Nellis. They were moving at hypersonic speeds. Warden's face went pale. Scramble, Viper. Scramble, everyone, base is under attack. Alarms blared across the installation. Pilots sprinted towards their jets, but it was too late. The inbound missiles were minutes, perhaps seconds, from impact. There was no time to intercept. In the sky, 60,000 feet above the unfolding chaos, Nix saw the entire battle space laid out before her. She saw the 8 enemy craft. She saw the hypersonic missiles they had launched. And she saw the base, her home, completely defenseless. There was no choice. There was no time for orders or permission. There was only the act. I'm engaging, she said, her voice a blade of ice. She pushed the throttle forward, and the F-22, which had been a patient, listening ghost, became a vengeful god. The Raptor dropped its nose and plunged into a no-vertical dive, accelerating past the speed of sound in seconds. The calm of the stratosphere was replaced by a violent, screaming rush of air. Inside the cockpit, Nix was a blur of motion. She flipped open the weapons control panel, her fingers dancing across the buttons. Fox 3, ripple fire, she whispered to herself, a mantra of destruction. The F-22's internal weapons bay doors snapped open. 6A IM-120 AMRAAM missiles dropped from their pylons, their rocket motors igniting a split second later, leaving Fiery trails against the purple sky. She hadn't fired at the enemy jets, she had fired at the missiles. It was an impossible shot. Hitting a hypersonic, maneuvering target with another missile was a feat of ballistic mathematics so complex that it was considered a 1 in a million chance. Nix had just fired 6 on the ground. Thorne watched in disbelief as the 6 friendly missile icons streaked across his screen. What is she doing? She's wasting her ordnance. But Nix wasn't just shooting, she was orchestrating. As the missiles flew, she transmitted a single, tight beam data burst to them, not a radar lock, but a set of coordinates, a precise point in space and time where she predicted the enemy projectiles would be. It was a tactic that didn't exist in any manual. It was something she had learned in the dark, redacted corners of her past. 4 of her missiles found their mark. 4 brilliant, silent flashes lit up the sky. 4 enemy projectiles vaporized into superheated dust. 2 got through. 2 hypersonic missiles, streaking at over Mach 5, were still on a direct path to the heart of Nellis. Down in the command center, the reality of the situation hit like a physical blow. They were about to be struck. The base's formidable defenses were useless against a threat this fast, this unexpected. Warden gripped the edge of the console, his knuckles white, watching the 2 red icons close the distance with terrifying speed. There was nothing he could do but watch the end arrive. But 60,000 feet up, Nix was not watching. She was still diving, her F-22 a screaming spear of vengeance. The 2 remaining missiles were beyond the reach of her AMRMS. She had only one option left, an option that was not a tactic, but an act of sheer desperate will. She pushed the Raptor past its structural limits, the airframe groaning in protest, the cockpit displays flickering with red warnings. She was in a race against physics, and she was losing. Viper, what's your status? She transmitted, her voice strained against the crushing G-forces in the air. 2 minutes out. Viper's voice crackled back, his usual arrogance, replaced by a raw urgency. Not good enough, Nix grunted. She had seconds. She armed her M61 Vulcan cannon, a weapon designed for close-range dogfighting, a last resort against a hypersonic projectile. It was like trying to hit a bullet with another bullet, while riding a lightning bolt. Her helmet-mounted display highlighted the first missile. Her targeting computer screamed that a solution was impossible. She ignored it. She trusted her eyes, her instincts, the thousands of hours that had fused her to this machine. She squeezed the trigger. A stream of 20mm cannon shells, glowing like angry hornets, spewed from the Raptor's nose. For a heart-stopping second, the stream seemed to pass harmlessly behind the missile. But Nix had accounted for the missile's speed, its trajectory, her own dive. She hadn't aimed at it. She had aimed at where it was going to be. The shells and the missile converged. A brilliant white-hot flower of an explosion blossomed in the desert sky. One down, the second missile was even closer to the base, its trajectory now terminal. She had no time to line up another cannon run. Her fuel was critical, her airframe screaming. There was only the jet. Warden, she said, her voice surprisingly calm. Tell my family, I'm sorry. She was going to ram it. She was going to use her 20-ton, $200 million fighter jet as a final, desperate shield. The decision was made in the space of a heartbeat. In the cold calculus of war, the loss of one pilot and one aircraft to save thousands of lives and a vital military installation was not a choice, but an imperative. Nix's hands were steady on the controls. She lined up the nose of her F-22 with the incoming missile, a final, desperate act of interception. The world narrowed to the glowing red icon on her HUD, and the rapidly expanding speck in the sky before her. This was it, the end of her story. In the command center they heard her last transmission. A collective gasp went through the room. Warden's face was a mask of horror. Nix, no, eject. That's an order, eject. But his voice was lost. To the distance, a plea against the inevitable. Viper, now airborne and racing towards the chaos, heard it too. Nix, don't do it. We're almost there. The desperation in the young pilot's voice was a stark testament to how quickly the morning had unraveled. The woman they had mocked was about to make the ultimate sacrifice, and they were helpless to stop her. But then, something impossible happened. As Nix braced for impact, a new tone echoed in her cockpit. Not a warning, but a confirmation. The F-22's most secret and advanced weapon system, a directed energy countermeasure designed to disrupt incoming guidance systems, had achieved a lock. It was a system she wasn't even supposed to know how to operate. A last-ditch defensive tool that was still highly experimental. In the redacted years she had done more than just learn about it. she had perfected its use. With less than a second to spare, she triggered it. A focused, invisible beam of energy shot from her aircraft, striking the incoming missile. It didn't explode it blinded it. The missile's sophisticated guidance system, fried by the energy pulse, went haywire. The projectile, now just a dumb piece of metal, veered wildly off course, tumbling end over end. It flew harmlessly over the base, its momentum carrying it deep into the empty desert, where it finally slammed into a barren mountainside in a spectacular, but harmless, explosion of rock and fire. A wave of collective, disbelieving relief washed through the command center. They were alive, they were safe. But the battle was not over. The 8 Phantom jets, their initial attack thwarted, were no longer silent. They broke formation, turning their full attention to the lone F-22 that had single-handedly ruined their plan. On Nyx's display, 8 hostile icons turned and began to converge on her position. The whispers were over. The hunt had begun. The sky, which moments before had been a stage for a desperate defense, now became an arena. The 8 Phantom jets, no longer feigning stealth, lit up Nyx's senses. Their profiles were sharp, angular, and utterly alien. They were not Russian, not Chinese. They were something new, a 5th-generation design that seemed to defy known aerodynamic principles. They moved with a predatory agility that made even the F-22 seem sluggish. "Warden, I'm engaged," Nyx reported, her voice a flat line of professional calm. She pulled the Raptor out of its dive, the G-forces pressing her into her seat. The world outside was a swirling blur of blue and brown. "I count 8 hostiles, 5th gen or higher. Aggressive maneuvering. Viper is 2 minutes out," Nyx Warden responded, his voice tight with tension. "Can you disengage, extend and escape?" "Negative, Warden," Nyx replied coolly. "They're boxing me in. Escape is not an option." It was true. The 8 jets had formed a loose, spherical cage around her, cutting off every possible escape route. It was a classic pack hunting tactic, designed to overwhelm and destroy a superior, but isolated, foe. They were giving her no room to run, no space to hide. They wanted a dogfight. In the command center, the mood shifted from relief back to dread. 1 F-22 against 8 advanced, unknown fighters was not a battle, it was a slaughter. Viper, pushing his F-35 to its absolute limit, could only listen in horror. "Nyx, what are your orders?" he transmitted, the words feeling inadequate. He was asking the pilot he had dismissed for guidance. For the first time, Nyx's voice carried a hint of something other than calm. It was not fear, it was a cold, hard resolve, a hunter's focus. "Your orders, Viper, are to stay back. You are not to engage until I thin the herd. Your F-35s are assets, don't waste them." She cut the transmission before he could reply. She didn't have time to argue. The first enemy fighter made its move. It broke from the formation, accelerating at a velocity that should have torn its wings off, and fired. A missile, unlike any she had seen before, with a burn time that was terrifyingly short, streaked towards her. Nyx responded instantly. She slammed her F-22 into a high G-turn, deploying a cloud of flares and chaff. The missile, however, ignored the countermeasures. It was tracking her heat signature with terrifying precision. It was going to hit. But Nyx wasn't flying the plane anymore. She was thinking in 3 dimensions, in vectors and energy states. She rolled the Raptor onto its back, pulled the nose up, and deliberately cut the engines. For a heart-stopping moment, the F-22 was a dead weight in the sky, a metal coffin falling towards the earth. The roar of the engines was replaced by an eerie, whistling silence. The enemy missile, tracking the intense heat of her afterburners, suddenly lost its target. The plume of fire it had been chasing had vanished. Confused, the missile's guidance system defaulted to its last known trajectory, screaming past the spot where Nyx's engines had been just a microsecond before. As the missile passed, Nyx reignited her engines. The F-22 roared back to life. With a violent, shuddering kick, she had performed a Pugachev's Cobra, a maneuver so difficult and dangerous in a plane not designed for it that it was considered suicidal. She had used the F-22's thrust vectoring nozzles not just to maneuver, but to disappear. The lead enemy pilot, seeing his missile miss, seemed to hesitate, a flicker of disbelief that Nyx exploited without mercy. As her engines roared back to life, she didn't flee. She pushed her nose forward, into the attack. She was now behind the enemy fighter. Fox 2, she snapped, firing an AIM-9X Sidewinder. The heat-seeking missile leaped from its rail, a fiery javelin that needed no complex data link. It saw the enemy's hot engine nozzle and flew straight for it. The alien craft, for all its speed and agility, had no defense against such a classic, close-range attack. It attempted to brake, but it was too late. The Sidewinder slammed into its engine, and the craft blossomed into a silent, expanding fireball. One down. The command center erupted in a collective, disbelieving cheer. Viper, watching on his tactical display, felt a chill run down his spine. He had just witnessed a master at work. The kill was not just a kill, it was a statement. But the remaining 7 fighters did not panic. They did not scatter. They reacted with cold, machine-like precision. They tightened their cage, their movements perfectly synchronized. They had learned from their comrade's mistake. They would not allow her to get behind them again. They all turned on her at once, a swarm of angry, intelligent hornets. Multiple missile launch warnings shrieked in Nyx's cockpit. 7 fighters, 7 missiles, all screaming towards her from different directions. There was no room to dodge, no space to run. The sky, which had been her sanctuary, was now a web of death, and she was the fly caught in its center. The cockpit was a cacophony of alarms, a symphony of imminent death. 7 missiles, 7 vectors of attack. Any normal pilot would have been paralyzed, overwhelmed by the sheer impossibility of survival, but Nyx's mind was preternaturally clear. The chaos outside was just a complex mathematical problem, and she was born to solve it. She couldn't outrun them. She couldn't dodge them all, so she didn't try. Instead, she flew directly into the heart of the storm. She pointed the nose of her Raptor towards the densest cluster of incoming missiles, and firewalled the What is she doing? Thorne breathed in the command center. She's flying into them. It looked like suicide, but it was a calculated act of genius. By flying towards the missiles, she dramatically reduced the time they had to track and adjust. She was forcing the engagement into a sliver of time and space so small that their advanced guidance systems would be their own undoing. Her F-22 became a blur, a silver streak weaving through a tapestry of fire and smoke. She deployed countermeasures not in a panic, but in precise timed bursts, creating pockets of confusion. She used the explosions of the missiles she did manage to decoy to mask her movements from the others. A missile from her left exploded as it was diverted by flares, and she used the expanding cloud of fire as a shield, diving through the superheated air to evade a missile from her right. Her plane was battered by shockwaves, the airframe screaming under the strain. Warning lights flashed across her console like a deadly pinball machine. But she was alive. She had flown through the eye of the needle, and she had emerged on the other side. She was now in the center of the enemy formation, a wolf inside the fold. The enemy pilots, who had been coordinating a long-range attack, were now forced into a close-quarters knife fight. Brawl the one arena where the F-22's combination of stealth, power, and thrust vector in agility gave it a supreme advantage. Before they could reorient, before they could comprehend how she had survived, she locked onto the nearest fighter, her Vulcan cannon spitting a stream of incandescent death. The 20mm shells ripped through the alien craft's wing, shredding it to pieces. The fighter tumbled out of control, a wounded bird spiraling towards the desert floor. 2 down, 6 to go. The fight was no longer a hunt. It was a brawl. The 6 remaining enemy fighters, their coordinated attack shattered, broke into 3 pairs. It was a smart, adaptive tactic. They were using mutual support, ensuring that Nyx could not isolate one without being targeted by its wingman. The elegant, geometric dance of long-range combat was over. Now, it was a swirling, chaotic dogfight, a 3-dimensional ballet of violence at 1,000 miles per hour. Nyx felt a grim satisfaction. This was her world. The years she had spent in the shadows were not just about data and passive sensors. They were about understanding the geometry of death, about pushing an airframe to its absolute limits, about thinking faster than the manor, the thing in the other cockpit. An enemy 2-ship formation latched onto her tail. Missile lock warnings blared again. She couldn't shake them. They mirrored her every move, their alien craft sticking to her like glue. She was on the defensive, bleeding energy with every desperate turn. Nyx, I'm 30 seconds out. Viper's voice cut through the chaos. Give me a target. Stay out. Viper, she ordered, her voice strained. They'll eat you alive. I have to separate them. She needed a plan. She needed to break their formation. She looked at her fuel gauge. It was dangerously low. The dive, the afterburner, the high-G maneuvers, they had all taken their toll. She had minutes of fuel left at most. She had to end this now. She did something that went against every instinct of a fighter pilot. She stopped evading. She straightened her flight path, flying straight and level, and cut her afterburner. To the enemy pilots, it must have looked like she was giving up, her engine damaged, her wheel broken. They saw an easy kill. The two fighters on her tail closed the distance, hungry for the final blow. Their wingman, seeing the trap sprung, moved to cut off any last-ditch escape. This was the moment Nix had been waiting for. As the lead pursuer came into cannon range, she slammed the throttles to full afterburner and pulled back on the stick, executing a maneuver that was pure, unadulterated aggression, a high-speed yo-yo. The F-22 shot upwards, converting its speed into altitude, then rolled over the top, gravity and thrust combining to sling her down, placing her directly on the tail of the fighter that had been hunting her just seconds before. The hunter had become the hunted. The enemy pilot was completely unprepared. Before he could even react, Nix had a perfect, clear shot. "Fox 2, she whispered. The Sidewinder leaped off the rail. 3 down. The explosion of the third enemy craft sent a shockwave through the sky and a corresponding one through the enemy's tactics. Their discipline, for the first time, wavered. The wingman of the destroyed jet, instead of holding formation, broke off in a vengeful, aggressive turn, trying to get a lock on Nix. It was a fatal, emotional mistake. Nix, anticipating the move, met his turn head-on. The two jets screamed towards each other in a deadly game of chicken. The alien craft fired its cannons, a stream of energy pulses flashing past Nix's canopy. She didn't flinch. Her own targeting, computer locked on. She had one AMROM left. She was saving it for a kill that had to be certain. This was not that kill. She trusted her gun. At a closing speed of over 2,000 miles per hour, the window for a shot was less than a second. She fired her Vulcan cannon, a weapon of brutal, simple physics, sent a stream of shells directly into the enemy's cockpit. The alien craft didn't explode. It simply died. Its systems shattered and tumbled lifelessly from the sky. For down, half the enemy force was gone, destroyed in a matter of minutes by a single unknown pilot. In the command center, the mood was one of stunned, reverent silence. They were witnessing something that would be spoken of in hushed, awe-filled tones for generations. This was not just a battle. It was the birth of a legend. Viper, now on station and orbiting at a safe distance, could only watch the spectacle. On his display, he saw the 4 remaining enemy icons, their movements no longer coordinated, but hesitant, almost confused. The wolf pack had lost its cohesion. They were now just for individual, dangerous predators, and they were facing a master. Nix Warden's voice was filled with a respect that bordered on awe. "What is your status?" "Fuel, critical," she reported, her breathing slightly ragged now. The physical toll of the fight was beginning to set in. "Ordnance is 1 AMRAM, and cannon rounds are low. I'm staying on station." "Negative, Nix, your mission is complete." Warden ordered, "Disengage, return to base. Viper will cover your exit." "Warden, if I leave now, they'll regroup," she countered, her voice firm. "They might even go after Viper, or they'll complete their original mission. I have to finish this." Before Warden could argue, the remaining 4 fighters made their move. They didn't attack her. They broke in for different directions, accelerating at impossible speeds. They were running, but they weren't retreating. They were heading for 4 different high-value targets on the ground: the main fuel depot, the runway intersection, the primary hangar, and the command center itself. It was a final, desperate gambit. They knew she couldn't stop them all. Enemy's final, desperate move was a stroke of malicious genius. It transformed the battlefield from a 1-4 dogfight into 4 separate, simultaneous crises. Nix's mind processed the tactical nightmare in a nanosecond. She was low on fuel, low on weapons, and physically nearing her limit. She couldn't be in 4 places at once. She had to choose. Which target was the most critical? Who would she save, and who would she sacrifice? The command center watched in horror as the 4 red diamonds scattered, each one a death sentence. For a part of the base, Viper, Lancer, engage. Warden yelled, "Intercept targets heading north and west." Go. Viper and his wingman banked hard, their afterburners kicking in as they raced to intercept 2 of the targets. But they were too far away. Their missiles would never reach them in time. That left 2 targets: the fuel depot, a massive, explosive target that would cripple the base for months, and the command center itself, the brain of the entire operation. Nix had fuel for 1 intercept. Her choice was brutal. She could save the commanders, the strategists, Warden and Thorn, or she could save the infrastructure that would allow the others to keep fighting. She made the choice that only a true warrior could. She ignored the craft heading for the command center for the men who had doubted her, who had sent her out alone and pushed her F-22 into a hard dive towards the one heading for the fuel depot. Nix, what are you doing? Warden's voice was incredulous. Your target is the one heading for us. You have blasters, Colonel, she replied, her voice strained as she fought the G-forces. The fuel farm doesn't. It was a cold, hard calculation. Lives versus logistics. She had chosen logistics. She lined up her shot. This was it. Her last missile, the AIM-120 AMRAAM. She had to make it count. The enemy craft, aware of her pursuit, began evasive maneuvers, jinking left and right. Her targeting computer struggled to maintain a lock. Come on, she whispered, her thumb hovering over the launch button. Hold still. The computer flashed green, a solid lock. Fox 3, she said, the words a final prayer. The missile dropped from her plane, its motor igniting, and screamed after the fleeing target. The command center watched the two icons, one friendly missile, one hostile craft convert. It was a perfect shot. The enemy jet erupted in a silent flash of light. 5 down, but as she watched the explosion, a new alarm shrieked in her cockpit. The fighter that had been heading for the command center had changed its mind. Seeing its comrade destroyed, it had altered its course. It was now coming for her. The enemy fighter, its primary mission abandoned, was now singularly focused on revenge. It came at her head-on, cannons blazing. Nix had no missiles left. Her cannon was almost empty. Her fuel gauge was a blinking red line of impending engine failure. She was, for all intents and purposes, defenseless. She met the charge. There was no fear, only a profound, weary acceptance. She had saved the base. She had done her duty. If this was the end, so be it. The two jets closed the distance in a blur, but just as the enemy was about to achieve a firing solution, the sky was ripped apart by a new arrival. Viper, having seen Nix's sacrifice, had disobeyed his orders. Instead of pursuing his assigned target, he had turned his F-35 and raced to her aid. I've got your back, Nix, he yelled over the radio, a new, profound respect in his voice. He fired an AMRAAM. The missile, guided by the F-35's powerful sensors, flew true. The enemy pilot, completely focused on Nix, never saw it coming. The jet exploded in a shower of metallic confetti. 6 down. The two remaining enemy fighters, their targets intercepted by Viper's wingman, saw their situation was hopeless. Their pack was broken, their mission a catastrophic failure. They did something that shocked everyone watching. They turned and fled, accelerating to a speed that left even the F-22 and F-35s behind. They simply vanished, their ghost-like signatures fading from the screens. The battle was over. A profound silence descended upon the sky, broken only by the ragged sound of Nix's breathing over the radio. Nix, what's your fuel state? Warden asked, his voice gentle. Dry, she replied, her voice barely a whisper. A glider, her engines had flamed out. The F-22, the most powerful air superiority fighter in the world, was now a $200 million brick falling out of the sky. She was thousands of feet in the air, miles from the base, with no power. Eject Nix, Warden ordered softly. That's an order. Get out of there. There was a long pause. The entire command center held its breath. They could hear the wind whistling over her microphone. Negative, Warden, she finally said. I'm bringing her home. Bringing home a dead F-22 was not just a matter of pride. It was a strategic necessity. The technology within the Raptor was a closely guarded national secret. Leaving it to crash in the desert, even a secure one, was unthinkable. But the feat of gliding a 60,000-pound aircraft, with the aerodynamic properties of a stone, over miles of terrain to a precise landing strip was considered a virtual impossibility. Nix, however, was not dealing in possibilities. She was dealing in absolutes. The cockpit was eerily silent without the hum of the engines. There was only the rush of the wind and the calm, synthesized voice of the onboard computer calling out her decreasing altitude. She had one chance to get this right. Her mind, which had been a whirlwind of tactical calculations, was now a sanctuary of calm. She focused on her airspeed, her angle of descent, the subtle inputs on the control stick that kept the massive jet from tumbling out of the sky. She was no longer a warrior. She was a pilot in the purest sense of the word. On the ground, the base scrambled. Emergency crews raced to the runway, laying down arresting gear and foaming the tarmac. Viper flew a wide, protective circle around her, his voice a constant, reassuring presence in her ear. You've got this, Nix. Just a few more miles. Keep your nose up. He was her eyes, calling out altitudes and wind speeds, acting as her guide. The cocky hotshot was gone, replaced by a focused, supportive wingman. The runway appeared in the distance, a thin gray line in a sea of brown. To the observers on the ground, her F-22 was a silent, graceful specter, descending with an unnatural quiet. It seemed impossible that it could be controlled. Nix fought the controls, her muscles aching. Without hydraulic power, every movement was a struggle. She lowered the landing gear using the emergency pneumatic system. The 3 thuds of the gear locking into place were the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. She was lined up. She was going to make it, but the desert is a fickle beast. A sudden, violent crosswind, a thermal gust rising from the hot desert floor, caught her left wing. The plane yawed violently, threatening to roll over. She fought it, putting all her strength into the rudder pedals, but it wasn't enough. The jet was going to cartwheel the second it touched the ground. This was it. After everything she had survived, she was going to die in a simple landing accident. As the F-22's wing dipped precariously, a lifetime of training took over. Nix didn't panic. She reacted. In the split second before the wingtip could catch the ground, she made a final, desperate input. She used the last of her momentum and the dregs of her control surface authority to not fight the roll, but to go with it, transforming the impending cartwheel into a controlled, one-winged skid. The left landing gear touched down first, the tire screaming in protest as it took the full, off-balance weight of the aircraft. The jet skewed sideways, metal grinding against asphalt in a shower of sparks. It was a brutal, ugly landing, but it was a controlled one. The Raptor slid down the runway, shedding speed with agonizing slowness, a wounded beast being dragged to a halt. It finally came to rest in the arresting gear, tilted at a crazy angle, smoke pouring from its undercarriage, but it was in one piece and its pilot was alive. For a long moment there was absolute silence. The entire base seemed to hold its collective breath. Then the canopy of the F-22 hissed open. Nix, her face pale and streaked with sweat, unstrapped herself. She sat there for a moment, the adrenaline finally leaving her system, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion that was so profound it was almost peaceful. She had done it. She had brought her home. Emergency crews swarmed the aircraft. A ladder was placed against the cockpit, and a medic climbed up, but Nix waved him off. Slowly, unsteadily, she climbed out of the cockpit and onto the wing of her battered jet. She stood there, a solitary figure against the vast desert sky, and looked at the crowd that had gathered. Warden was there. Thorne was there. Viper had landed his jet and was running towards her, his helmet under his arm. The entire ground crew, the pilots, the commanders, they were all there, their faces filled with a mixture of awe, relief, and profound, unadulterated respect. No one spoke. No one needed to. The silence was more eloquent than any words could ever be. It was the silence of a legend being born. In that moment, she was no longer the quiet analyst, the mysterious transfer, the ghost in the machine. She was Nix, and her name would never be forgotten. The debriefing was not an interrogation. It was a testimony, held in the same room where she had been doubted just hours before. Nix stood before Colonel Vance, not as a subordinate but as an equal. She recounted the battle with a detached, clinical precision, describing the enemy's tactics, their capabilities, and her responses. She left out the fear, the desperation, the certainty of her own death. She spoke only of the facts. When she finished, the room was silent. Warden leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. "Captain," he began, his voice heavy with the weight of the day. "What you did today, it was unprecedented. You saved this base. You saved us all." He paused, looking at the faces around the room. Viper, Thorne, the other pilots. "We underestimated you. I underestimated you. That was a mistake, one that I will not make again." Viper stepped forward. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a humility that was both startling and sincere. He looked Nix in the eye. "I owe you an apology, Captain, and my life. What you did out there, I've never seen anything like it. It was an honor to fly with you." He extended his hand. Nix looked at it for a moment, then took it. The handshake was firm, a wordless acknowledgement of a bond forged in fire. The story of the Battle of Nellis, of the lone pilot who took on 8 unknown enemies and won, spread like wildfire. It became a whisper in the halls of the Pentagon, a classified legend told in hushed tones among the elite pilots of the Air Force. The wreckage of the 4 downed enemy craft was recovered. From the desert, what was found was shocking. The technology was decades ahead of anything previously known. It was not from any known nation on Earth. The mystery of who they were and where they came from remained unsolved, a chilling question mark hanging over the victory. But one thing was certain: they would be back, and the world would need a pilot who knew how to fight them. Nix was promoted, of course, but she refused a desk job at the Pentagon, a command position, or a medal ceremony at the White House. She requested only one thing: to be reassigned. Not to a prestigious fighter wing, but back to the shadows, to the black-flagged programs, where the real work was done. She knew the fight was not over. It had just begun. Her call sign Nix, once a source of mystery and quiet mockery, now took on a new meaning. It became a symbol of hope, a promise that, when the darkness came again, there would be a guardian of the night waiting to meet it. The legacy of that day was not written in reports or filed away in classified archives. It was etched into the culture of the base, into the very air the pilots breathed. The name Nix became a verb. To pull a Nix was to achieve the impossible, to turn a no-win scenario into a victory through sheer skill and audacity. The battered F-22 she had landed was not scrapped. It was meticulously repaired, but one piece was left untouched. Small, jagged scar on the left wingtip where it had scraped against the runway. It was left there as a reminder, a monument not to a machine but to the will of the pilot who had refused to let it die. Viper became a different kind of pilot. The cocky hotshot was tempered by the fire of that day. He became a leader, a mentor to the younger pilots, and he always told them the story of Nix. He told them that the greatest weapon in their arsenal was not their radar, not their missiles, but the mind and the heart of the person in the cockpit. He taught them that respect was not given by rank, but earned through action. Colonel Vance, for his part, dedicated the rest of his career to hunting for the origins of the Phantom craft. He and Nix, though separated by distance and classification levels, remained in contact. They were two veterans of a secret war, bound by a shared experience that no one else could ever truly understand. They were searching for answers, preparing for the day when the Phantoms would return. And what of Nix? Anya Sharma? The woman faded back into the anonymity she preferred. She became a ghost again, a name on a redacted file. But Nix, the pilot, the legend, lived on. She flew in skies no one else saw, fought battles no one else knew about. She became the tip of the spear in a war fought in the shadows, a silent guardian against a threat that the world was not yet ready to face. Her backstory, once a mystery, became a myth. Some said she had lost a wingman years ago, and that she flew now for two. Others whispered that the Calcian Nix was not just a name, but a promise to the darkness that she would always be there, waiting, a goddess of the night sky, ready to defend the dawn. The truth was simpler and far more profound. She was a pilot, and on one impossible day in the Nevada desert, against all odds she had saved them all. Years later, a new generation of pilots would walk the halls of Net. They would see the scar on the wing of the F-22 displayed in the main hangar and ask about it. And an old master sergeant, a man with a face like a roadmap named Elias Thorne, would smile and tell them a story. He would tell them of a day when the sky went silent, when 8 ghosts came out of the empty blue to wipe them from the face of the earth. He would tell them of the alarms, the fear, the certainty of their own destruction, and then his voice would change. It would fill with a reverence, a deep and abiding awe, as he spoke of the lone pilot who went up to face them. He wouldn't use her real name. He would only call her Nix. He would describe how she had danced among hypersonic missiles, how she had turned a state-of-the-art fighter into an extension of her own will, how she had faced down impossible odds and emerged, not just victorious, but transcendent. He would tell them that she had taken on 8 enemy jets alone and won, but he would also tell them that the victory was not the point. The point was the choice she made. The choice to go up when no one else would. The choice to shield the base with her own aircraft. The choice to bring her wounded bird home when every protocol screamed to let it go. He would tell them that a pilot's duty is not just to fight, but to protect, not just to fly, but to endure. And as the young pilots listened, their eyes wide, they would understand. They would understand that the sky was more than just a place to fly. It was a sacred trust, and the story of Nix was its most powerful sermon. They would leave that hangar changed, looking up at the vast blue expanse, not with arrogance, but with humility and a renewed sense of purpose. The legend of the quiet woman who was once just a data analyst had become a part of their DNA, a standard against which they would measure themselves for the rest of their lives. And so, the legacy endured, a story of courage, of sacrifice, and of the unyielding power of a single, extraordinary pilot who, when the world was about to end, climbed into her cockpit and flew into the night.